December 17th, 1903. Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Two bicycle mechanics named Wilbur and Orville Wright lift a wooden machine off a sand dune for 12 seconds, and every history book on Earth calls it the moment humans first flew. It is a great story. It is also wrong by 120 years. Because in November 1783, while George Washington was still fighting the British, before the United States even had a constitution, two men climbed into a basket in Paris, rose above the rooftops, and flew across the city for 25 minutes. Thousands of people watched them do it. A king watched them do it. Human flight was not born in America in 1903. It was born in France in 1783 in a machine made of cloth, paper, and smoke. And the story of that machine is stranger than almost anything in aviation. It includes a flying sheep, a village that attacked the sky with pitchforks, a king who wanted criminals to be the first pilots, a man who threw his own trousers into the ocean to stay alive, three explorers who vanished into the Arctic and were not found for 33 years, and a jump from the edge of space that broke the sound barrier with nothing but a human body. But this story does not start with any of that. It does not even start with a scientist. It starts in a small French paper town with a man staring into a fireplace, watching something rise. Annonay, southern France, the early 1780s. Joseph Montgolfier is the daydreamer of a large family of successful papermakers, the kind of man who is brilliant at ideas and hopeless at business. According to the story he later encouraged, he was watching laundry drying over a fire one evening when he noticed the fabric billowing upward, filling with something invisible that wanted to rise. Whether that exact fireside moment happened is debated, but what came next is documented. Joseph and his younger brother Etienne, the practical one, began building bags of paper and cloth in secret, holding them over fires and watching them climb. They were convinced they had discovered a new gas hidden inside smoke, and they believed thicker smoke meant more lift. So they burned wet straw and wool, and by some accounts even old shoes and rotting meat, to make the foulest, heaviest smoke possible. They were completely wrong about the science. There was no magic gas. Hot air is simply lighter than cold air, and it rises. But their mistake flew anyway. On June 4th, 1783, in the main square of Annonay, the brothers went public. In front of a stunned crowd, a cloth and paper balloon roughly 10 meters wide rose off the ground with nothing inside it but heat, climbed high above the town, drifted for about 10 minutes, and settled more than a mile away. Two paper makers had just launched the age of flight using the family stationery. Word raced to Paris within days, and the French Academy of Sciences demanded a demonstration. But in Paris, a rival was already moving. A physicist who heard the reports, assumed the brothers were using cutting-edge chemistry, and accidentally invented something even better. His name was Jacques Charles, and he was everything the Montgolfiers were not: a serious physicist, a brilliant lecturer, a man who actually understood gases. When vague news of the Annonay flight reached Paris, Charles assumed no one could fly on something as crude as smoke. He reasoned they must be using hydrogen, a gas isolated only 17 years earlier, 14 times lighter than air. He was giving the papermakers far too much credit. But in doing so, Charles and two craftsman brothers named Robert built the world's first hydrogen balloon, a varnished silk sphere filled with gas produced by pouring acid over a quarter-ton of iron filings. On August 27, 1783, in pouring rain, it rose from the Champ de Mars in Paris, the exact ground where the Eiffel Tower stands today, in front of an enormous crowd. It shot into the clouds and vanished. 45 minutes later, it came down 15 miles away in a farming village called Gonesse, and the people of Gonesse had absolutely no idea what they were looking at. Imagine it from their side. A pale, wobbling, hissing thing falls out of the sky and writhes in a field, leaking a strange smell. The villagers concluded it was a monster, or the work of the devil, and they responded the way you would expect. They attacked it with pitchforks and knives and tore it to shreds. Reports from the time even describe it being dragged behind a horse for good measure. The lesson stuck. The French government soon circulated public notices explaining that balloons were harmless science experiments, and that anyone who found one should please stop stabbing it. Paris found the whole affair hilarious, and balloon fever exploded. Which left King Louis XVI, watching from Versailles, with a royal problem. Two technologies now existed: smoke versus hydrogen, papermakers versus physicists. And the next demonstration would happen in front of the king himself, with 3 very unusual passengers on board. Versailles, September 19th, 1783. Etienne Montgolfier stands before the palace with a brand new balloon, painted blue and gold with royal designs, built in 4 frantic days and nights because a rainstorm had destroyed the previous one just before the show. In front of him, King Louis XVI, Queen Marie Antoinette, and a crowd stretching beyond counting. Nobody knew whether a living creature could survive the upper air. Some feared the atmosphere itself would kill anything that rose too high. So this flight carried the world's first test crew, a sheep, a duck, and a rooster, in a wicker cage. The choices were genuinely scientific. The sheep, reportedly nicknamed Montausiel Climb to the Sky, was the human stand-in, since its body was thought to work roughly like ours. The duck was the control, a creature already built for altitude. The rooster was the second control, a bird that never flies high. It was, in every meaningful way, the same logic space programs would use with animals nearly 2 centuries later. Before a human rides the rocket, the animals ride first. The fire was lit, fed with damp straw that produced smoke so foul that the Queen reportedly retreated from the launch site. Then the ropes were cut, and the barnyard crew rose roughly 1,500 feet into the air, drifting about 2 miles in 8 minutes before landing softly in the woods. All 3 animals survived. The rooster had an injured wing, which caused a brief scientific panic about the dangers of altitude, until witnesses confirmed the sheep had simply kicked it before takeoff. The sky, it seemed, would not kill you. So the king made his decision about the first human flight, and it tells you everything about how dangerous people believed this was. His Majesty proposed sending up 2 condemned criminals. If they died, France lost nothing. If they lived, they would be pardoned. One young scientist heard that plan and was outraged. The first person to leave the Earth, he argued, should not be a man sentenced to die. It should be him. His name was Jean-François Pilatre de Rosiers. 29 years old, a chemistry teacher, a showman, and completely fearless. With help from a well-connected nobleman, the Marquis d'Arlande, he lobbied the court until the king gave in. No criminals. Volunteers. On November 21st, 1783, from the gardens of the Château de la Mouette on the edge of Paris, the 2 men climbed into a gallery at the base of a 7-story Montgolfier balloon, stoking a fire pit hanging in the mouth of the envelope. The ropes were released, and for the first time in the history of our species, human beings left the ground in free flight. They crossed Paris for around 25 minutes, covering more than 5 miles, while the city lost its mind beneath them. It was not a calm ride. By the Marquis's own account, sparks kept burning small holes in the fabric, and he spent part of mankind's first flight dabbing at fires with a wet sponge, while de Rosiers shouted at him to keep feeding the flames. They cleared the rooftops, cleared the windmills, and landed safely among astonished farmers. That evening, the Marquis went to tell the story to a fascinated American diplomat living in Paris, Benjamin Franklin. When a skeptic later asked what use this new invention could possibly have, Franklin reportedly gave the answer that outlived them all. What use is a newborn baby? 10 days later, the rival technology answered. On December 1st, Jacques Charles and one of the Robert brothers lifted off from the Tuileries Gardens in their hydrogen balloon before an estimated 400,000 spectators, roughly half the population of Paris, half the city. They flew for over 2 hours and 21 miles, landing at sunset. And then Charles did something reckless. He went up again, alone, and the lightened balloon rocketed to around 9,000 feet, where he watched the sun, which had already set, rise again and set a second time. He is the first human being who ever saw 2 sunsets in one day. The altitude stabbed pain through his ear. He descended, and Jacques Charles never flew again. One perfect day was enough. In a single year, France had invented the hot air balloon, the gas balloon, and the pilot. If you are enjoying how 2 papermakers beat the Wright brothers by a century, subscribe. There is a new story like this every week. Because flight had arrived. But the sky does not hand out miracles for free. It was about to start collecting payment. Europe fell into full balloon mania. Balloon hats, balloon dresses, balloon chairs, balloon hairstyles piled high on fashionable heads. The balloon was on dinner plates and snuff boxes before it was 2 years old. And the next obvious prize was hanging right there on the map, the English Channel. 21 miles of cold, open water between England and France. 2 teams raced for it. On the French coast, Pilâtre de Rosiers, the first man ever to fly, waited for winds with an experimental design. On the English coast, a showman named Jean-Pierre Blanchard and an American doctor named John Jeffries, who was paying for the whole attempt, waited with a hydrogen balloon. Blanchard and Jeffries went first, on January 7th, 1785. Halfway across, the cold air shrank their hydrogen and the balloon began sinking toward the sea. Neither man could swim, so they threw out the ballast. Then the food. Then the scientific instruments, the anchors, the ropes, the fancy silk-covered oars they had brought to row through the air. Still sinking. So they stripped. Coats, jackets, and finally Blanchard's own trousers went over the side into the channel. 2 of the most famous men in Europe crossed into France, freezing, triumphant, and very nearly naked. It worked. They landed safely near Calais as heroes. 5 months later, de Rosiers tried the crossing in the other direction, against the prevailing winds, using a design that combined a hydrogen balloon with a hot air balloon, a fire burning beneath a giant bag of explosive gas. Colleagues warned him. On June 15, 1785, about half an hour after takeoff, the craft failed catastrophically and fell from the sky near the French coast. De Rosiers and his companion Pierre Romain were killed instantly. The first human being to fly had become the first human being to die flying. The 2 records sit 19 months apart, and the sky kept collecting. In 1819, Sophie Blanchard, Jean-Pierre's widow, who had become Napoleon's official aeronaut and the most famous female pilot on Earth, was performing her signature night show over Paris, launching fireworks from a hydrogen balloon. The fireworks ignited the gas. She became the first woman to die in an aviation accident. Ballooning had proven it could amaze, and it had proven it could kill. Now it was about to prove something else. The same balloons that carried showmen over cheering crowds could carry soldiers over enemy lines. June 1794. The battlefield of Fleurus, in modern Belgium. French soldiers hold a tethered balloon called the Enterprising, and from a basket high above the smoke, observers watch every movement of the enemy army, dropping notes and signals to the generals below. It is the first time in history a military aircraft has been used in battle. The world's first air force, operating a full 109 years before the first airplane existed. But the balloon's greatest war story came 76 years later, and it was not about watching a city. It was about escaping one. In September 1870, Prussian armies surrounded Paris completely. 2 million people, sealed off from the world. No trains, no roads, no telegraph. The only direction left was up. So Parisians began building balloons inside the city's empty train stations, sewing them from whatever fabric could be found, training sailors as pilots, and flying them out over the enemy guns, mostly at night. 66 balloons escaped the city during the siege. Together they carried out roughly 11 tons of mail, an estimated 2.5 million letters, plus over 100 passengers, including Léon Gambetta, a government minister who floated over the Prussian lines in October 1870 to organize French resistance from outside. Prussian riflemen shot at the balloons. Winds scattered them wildly. One crew aiming for the French countryside ended up in Norway, nearly 900 miles away, an accidental world distance record. There was one problem no balloon could solve. They could fly out of Paris, but never back in. Nobody could steer. The answer was carried in the baskets. Homing pigeons, which flew home to Paris carrying dispatches photographically shrunk onto tiny films, each one holding thousands of messages. A starving city, running the world's first airmail service and microfilm network at the same time. Paris eventually fell anyway, but the balloon had shown it could defy an entire army, which raised an intoxicating question at the century's end. If a balloon could cross enemy lines, could it cross the last blank space on the map? The place that had already killed hundreds of explorers? By the 1890s, the North Pole was the obsession of the age. More than 1,000 people had tried to reach it by ship and sledge, and by one contemporary count, over 700 of them had died. Every attempt on foot had failed. A Swedish engineer named Salomon August André proposed skipping the ice entirely. flying to the pole in a hydrogen balloon. The King of Sweden funded him. So did Alfred Nobel. The balloon, named the Eagle, leaked from the day it was built. One of the original crew members, a meteorologist, examined the gas losses and quit the expedition, saying it could not survive the journey. André went anyway. His final crew, Knut Frenkel, a young engineer, and Niels Strindberg, a 24-year-old physicist and photographer who had just become engaged and who carried a farewell letter for his fiancée that he planned to drop as they departed. In the chaos of launch, he forgot. On July 11, 1897, the Eagle lifted off from an island in the Svalbard archipelago, 600 miles from the pole. Within minutes, the steering ropes tore away and the basket dipped into the sea before the balloon lurched upward and drifted north, out of sight. Then, silence. A few messages arrived by carrier pigeon and floating buoy. After that, nothing. For 33 years, the world had no idea what happened to the three men in the Eagle. 33 years. The answer came in August 1930, when a Norwegian sealing ship happened to land on Kvitøya, White Island, a remote scrap of ice-covered rock. The crew found the remains of a camp, a boat, equipment, and the three explorers. André's final diary was still in the inside pocket of his coat, and beside the bodies lay something almost impossible: Strindberg's camera and rolls of exposed film. Technicians in Stockholm developed that film after 33 years in Arctic ice, and dozens of frames survived. The world could suddenly see the disaster through the victim's own eyes. The crashed Eagle lying on the pack ice just 65 hours into the flight, the men standing beside it, the long march south that the diaries describe, dragging sledges over drifting ice for months, eating seals and polar bears, until they reached the island where they died, likely within weeks, in October 1897. The three were carried home through Stockholm past enormous silent crowds and honored as national heroes. The letter to Strindberg's fiancée was never found. The 19th century had proven that balloons could not conquer distance. The 20th century would ask the sky a different question. Not how far, how high. In 1903, the Wright brothers flew at Kitty Hawk, and the airplane began taking the sky away from the balloon. Faster, steerable, unstoppable. By the middle of the 20th century, the balloon looked like a museum piece. Instead, it did something remarkable. It went where planes could not. The year 1960 alone rewrote its story twice. In August, an American Air Force captain named Joseph Kittinger rode a helium balloon to 102,800 feet, 19 miles up, into blackness where the curve of the Earth is visible, opened the door of his gondola, and jumped, falling for more than 4 minutes to test whether a human could survive escape from the edge of space. And in October, an engineer named Ed Yost lifted off from a field in Bruning, Nebraska, under a nylon balloon heated by a propane burner he had developed. The first modern hot air balloon. No straw, no smoke, no wet sponges. In 1963, Yost flew one across the English Channel, finishing the crossing that had killed Pilatre de Rosier, and in 1978, a balloon he built carried 3 men across the entire Atlantic. Then, in October 2012, an Austrian skydiver named Felix Baumgartner rode a helium balloon to roughly 128,000 feet, 24 miles, more than 3 times the height of passenger jets, and stepped off. He fell faster than the speed of sound, over 800 miles per hour, becoming the first human to break the sound barrier with nothing but his own body. And the calm voice guiding him by radio through the whole descent belonged to his mentor and capsule communicator, Joseph Kittinger, then 84 years old, the man who had made the same kind of jump half a century earlier. Every human being who has ever stood at the edge of space got there the same way the sheep and the duck and the rooster did, under a balloon. And the working balloon never stopped. Roughly 1,800 weather balloons rise around the world every single day, the invisible backbone of every forecast on your phone. Each October, some 500 balloons fill the dawn sky over Albuquerque at the largest balloon festival on Earth. And on quiet mornings from Turkey to Kenya to Mexico, tourists float over valleys in the direct descendants of a machine 2 papermakers lit in 1783. So the real question about the balloon is not who flew first. That answer is carved into the record. France, 1783, 120 years before Kitty Hawk. The real question is why the balloon survived. Every other first-generation technology gets replaced. The balloon watched the airplane, the jet, and the rocket take over its sky and simply refuse to disappear. Part of the answer is practical. The balloon is the simplest possible aircraft, a bag and something lighter than air. And Charles's hydrogen design was so close to Wright on day one that gas balloons barely changed for 2 centuries. Simple machines are very hard to kill. But the deeper answer is about what flying feels like. A plane takes you through the sky, sealed in metal, fighting the wind. A balloon lets you stand in the sky. It moves exactly at the speed of the wind, which means you feel no wind at all, just silence and the earth turning slowly underneath you. Every other aircraft conquered the sky. The balloon joined it. It was there when kings ruled France and watched a sheep make history. It was there when a starving city mailed 2.5 million letters over an enemy army. And it was there, holding a man 24 miles above the earth, in the same decade we landed robots on Mars. Somewhere right now, over the rock valleys of Cappadocia, a tourist is drifting through sunrise in Joseph Montgolfier's machine. Somewhere above a weather station, a white balloon is climbing through the dark with tomorrow's forecast. Somewhere, an engineer is designing a balloon to carry passengers to the edge of the stratosphere. All of it traces back to one daydreamer in a French paper town, staring at fabric rising over a fire. Humanity's first flying machine was, in the end, a paper bag. We just never stopped finding new places to send it. If stories like this are your thing, subscribe. A new one drops every week. And tell me in the comments if you could take one balloon ride from this story. Versailles in 1783, out of besieged Paris in 1870, or the edge of space in 2012. Which basket are you climbing into?